everyone. So, as you heard from our bios, both of us are lawyers. We are not engineers and we are not people who work with tech. So, I want to spend a minute maybe talking about why we've come to this question of tech and what are, because of our very different entry point, how we see tech interacting with what is playing out otherwise. So, as Shruti mentioned, we are researchers of the criminal justice system and we're also criminal defense lawyers, which means we take a lot of cases. I mean, it's a little bit of legal aid, but these are cases that we take of people largely belonging to marginalized communities and most specifically, the denotified tribes. So a lot of our work is from the entry point of looking at these tribes which have not been ascribed any kind of socioeconomic status within like how we understand the market economy, etc., and therefore have seen themselves being affected by various market factors very differently. So in this, can you move on to the next slide? So our research then looks at what is it that keeps them in the criminal justice system so much when they are otherwise not visible as a significant enough population that has schemes devised for it, etc. So they come. Our research and work is kind of steeped in in an understanding of the caste system that we have in India and how that informs the criminal justice system. By which I mean that in the caste system, everyone has like occupational hereditary occupations or the ones that they are ascribed by birth. So then if you have people who are working with leather, if you have people who are cleaning your streets, if you have people who are traders by birth, then the necessary kind of corollary that follows is that you also have criminals who are born criminals or that are considered hereditary. And this is largely what the denotified tribes today are. They're all people that were considered once to be criminals by birth. Anvesh here will speak a little bit more about how exactly this kind of enumeration of them, of their status happened. But largely this was a colonial instrument called the Criminal Tribes Act, which basically said that there are criminal communities which are hereditary and they have particular kind of features, behavioral attributes, practices that basically indicate criminality. So this becomes, we see, as the first instinct of a system to say that this is how criminality, this is what criminality looks like, this is what it means, this is what a criminal must perhaps be doing in the rest of their time. And we see from this an effort to collect data, make meaning of it, and analyze this at a large pace within the criminal justice system. And we see this not within courts where everyone is talking about data, is looking at pendency, things like that, but actually police were the people that the policing institution was the one that was manufacturing and creating a lot of data that was giving meaning to everything else that would happen within the criminal justice system. So to this end, given that now today we have a lot of these implements that are digitizing, your fingerprints and what all it gives you access to when you enter a justice system, which court, which place do you live in. All of this information is anyway now accessible through like various applications, etc., that you have. But we were interested in looking, but when you look at that and when you think, oh, what is happening to the privacy of these people who are being incarcerated, you're also leaving out, we felt that a big part of where exactly is this need for enumeration in the justice system coming from? What has come before this? So that's what we tried to do, which was to look at the historicity of criminal databases. Where did databases come from in the justice system originally? What all were they looking at? You can move on to the next question. And while everyone talks about that there is bias in tech, there is, there are unintended consequences of tech itself, we were interested in asking the question of what exactly was a database supposed to do? And then when you add the layer of tech on top of it, what is it doing now? So the question becomes not what is the tech doing, but what are databases that are performing certain functions and creating data for certain ends. So we don't talk about bias as being a byproduct of the data, but we see that data being created about certain communities, about certain people, as being the bias of the caste system itself. So this is where we came with in our paper. And we came to Hyderabad because, I mean, we are based out of Bhopal, but all of the technology that is being brought into Bhopal is coming from Hyderabad, where we're very happy to borrow and to see all of this glitzy glam of Hyderabad, even though both of us are from here. But still, so there were two, three things that we saw as being very interesting about Hyderabad. So when the new state formation happened, it's very curious that it becomes a hub for the merging of how policing becomes the protector of like this of and that kind of law and order investment is what is needed for you to secure the glitzy glam of the city and what is needed for you to create a perfect city in many ways. So all of the state investment that were going, I think there was like maybe $300 million that was given to the police department, larger than any other department got between 2014 to 2016, I think. And this was because they thought that having a very tech equipped police force would mean that we would attract a lot more private investment. We would be able to develop the city a lot more. So this is the first thing that kind of happened. And the pipeline of that led towards that big building that we have now in Banjara Hills, the integrated command and control, which is modeled after the New York Police Department. And the aspiration that you can see is of like a city like New York, of a place like Singapore, which have these police headquarters where data is not only housed by the police department, but also data from other departments. All of that is accessible within one place for police control. So that's a very curious kind of case, because police departments have not necessarily had access to all of this data. The second thing that we saw that was curious in this set of incidents was that as soon as I think the state was formed, there was that huge survey that happened, the Kutumba Samagra Survey, no, which asked for like 94 parameters of like our lives, basically going from whether you have an AC in the house, whether you have disabilities, whether like there are people who have other chronic conditions, do you have a car, do you have all of this. While this is becoming a very common data set everywhere, like within states for to encapsulate about their citizens, what was very curious was that all of this data was actually housed in the police department for like the initial period of time before it went on to the planning department, which then got the tender, etc. So this to us was very curious that the police department is responsible for the management of this data. The third thing that we saw as being very interesting was right after this resident survey happened, the next big survey to happen is called the Sakala Nerasthula Samagra Survey, which is basically an enumeration of all the criminals in the state, whether they are casual, whether they are professional offenders. I'll come to these different categories of how they are slotting this in a bit. But so they basically enumerate not only, it's similar to the Kutumba Samagra Survey, that it is asking for all of these details about who is in your home, what is your property, etc. But significantly, it's also tracing family trees of people who are criminals, because the assumption is that association breeds criminality. And association of whether space, of proximity, all of this means criminal behavior is incumbent or it's going to follow. So, and the fact that it's very curious that this is the second large survey to happen after a kind of citizen well-being kind of survey, right? So the understanding is very clear that, and even with, if you look at what press notes, etc., are saying after these surveys are done, you will see that the attempt is to make a 360-degree profile of a person. So even if your Kutumba Samagra survey is not speaking about what are criminal antecedents, what are your family, they are asking you who else is in your family and what else do they have. But they are able to really also overlap both of these, make them speak to each other to make a very clear map of where people are. And by the way, when this criminal survey was done, they've also geotagged each of these offenders, whether they are small or whether they are big. Whether they have been convicted or even if they have been acquitted, they have still been entered into this survey, saying that this is still someone we need to keep track of, because we are not doing a very good job of keeping track of people. And I think it was seen that at that time they gave out some number that 60% of the people that came into the system as part of that survey were not people that the police had been able to track before or anything of that sort. But now that they had been able to trace family trees, they were able to see not only what we understand as gangs that are operating, but even family members you're able to ascribe criminality to the extent that even minors are being collected information from. I think there's a case in Telangana actually where the there are two people who have actually challenged the collection of this survey, etc., in court, and the fact that there are minors, that even though there is no conviction, there is nothing at all, what is the level of data collection that you can do from a person is the question. Where in the Kutumba Samagra survey, I will say this, that the information that was being collected was at least framed as being voluntary. But when it becomes a criminal survey, you are not allowed to say yes, no, any of this. You were just, this was automatically seen as a legitimate exercise for the state to be doing, and therefore you have to submit all of this information regardless. So, I mean, I want to, you can move on to the next one, sorry. Yeah, so you'll see that the comprehensive criminal survey, it asked for all of this information. It took fingerprints, it took photos. This also ties into a recent legislation that now allows the justice system to hold this data for 75 years. Whether you, even if you are no longer in the justice system, whether you aren't, the idea is that once you've entered the system, you have to be kept track of, regardless of whether that you were acquitted of that offense, whether you've also given up your life of crime or whatever it is. But I want to, think of this idea of where is this bit of, people will still commit crime more, people will still commit crime, where is that kind of anxiety and that need to keep information coming from? I'll take it back to the police manuals. So police manuals are largely what govern how police functions. What are they supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? How frequently are they supposed to go? What powers do they have and what powers don't they have? All of this is regulated by police manuals. Now, the police manual that we currently have is one that's from 1987 from Andhra Pradesh. It was simply carried over when the state was formed. Uh, so while they tell you which police officer, I'm not sure how intimately we're aware of like what the police does, but basically within a police station there are beat officers who have different beats within their local jurisdiction, and they're supposed to patrol these beats very regularly. And the fact of that they patrol these streets very regularly is what is seen as a good good police behavior, because it means that you are creating some kind of deterrence where the criminals in your area, or where basically even if there are reputed people who are living there, are aware of what's happening and are secure basically. So that, and while they're doing these patrols, what has evolved from what used to be like in our villages we used to have like these station crime notebooks where actually, which was just kept by the landlord, by the biggest landlord of the, or the sarpanch of the village, which tended to be someone from a dominant caste or like an upper caste person, and they had to keep information of anyone who was coming and going out of the village. So not only does this mean people who were nomadic in nature, again, which form a large part of like the criminal communities that were later tagged by the colonial government and follow that today, but also that this information was then to be submitted to like police stations who were not doing this work themselves. So what has gotten entered into police information at this point is already what are presumptions that have been made, but it is entered as data, that there is this activity that we find suspicious. Is it corroborated? No. Is it only of people who have some kind of criminal behavior that has existed? No, it's not. It's simply an account of what is unusual that's happening. So today's police manuals also still hold all of this kind of information, and there are different kind of threat levels or different kind of activity that's triggered each time a particular kind of behavior is existing, right? So you have something called suspect sheets, which is where you might think this is a convicted person, you might think that this is, so basically you suspect. So that becomes one sheet that you're entering. Then there is something called a known depredator, which means that, okay, this is a person who has some kind of cases against them. But again, the category of case becomes very important, because the category of the case is what we see when Anvesh explains has a particular kind of caste logic which is encoded within it. Then you have history sheets, which are basically the most confidential kind of documents that police officers hold. And they hold this, they collect information throughout this for like, throughout the period of one person's life, a person's life once you've entered into it. And these are the ones that are again traded from police station to police station. At the district level, there's information that goes every week. There's an intelligence gazette that's updated monthly within the state, which is where this information goes. So history sheet is what makes it up. And we see that actually all of the people who populate these different kinds of sheets are all people belonging to different marginalized communities, because they are all the ones who are feeling the effects of different kinds of influences of market economy. For instance, if there's a drought and they're not able to find food, so their migratory patterns become suspect. That's, I mean, I'm using an example to say this, but today's police manuals still mandate all of this kind of data collection, not only of the manner in which it's supposed to be held, and there are details as to how you keep these narratives also. What all are you supposed to record? What are you supposed to ask about the associates of this person? So, and not only is that it, there's also a very clear surveillance architecture that is still maintained. So then today, when we are largely using apps, all of these apps are working on this logic. So today on your TS Corp, which is of course lauded quite well as a very efficient application that is used, all of this. So today you can ideally put in an Aadhaar number for someone and you can see what databases this person is across, where all this person is named as being even just a suspect, or what kind of information has just been entered about him entering or exiting a place. It can, and you can also blacklist someone's phone number through the app itself. So in the name of interconnectivity, there is interoperability of like these databases and of having this access of information. You're also able to take steps like this, which police manuals are not very clear about, like giving this kind of discretion to police officers, right? And so there's, I think you all know that police officers have always worked with informants. Informants is a very large part of like the policing ecosystem, where informants are largely drawn from like bastis where they think criminal activity is happening, from gangs themselves, things like that, which is fine. And it has always traditionally allowed the police to make whatever kind of narratives, because you don't have to ever prove your mukbir information in court. You don't, because you can't divulge who the informant is. So it has meant that whatever kind of construction of crime narrative you can make is allowed for you. So now you have an app called the Dragnet, which completely functions outside of the purview of the rest of like the TS Corp or anything at all, because the people who compile information into this are people of a very select, it's just an informant network. So you can go and you can enter any tip. You don't have to substantiate it. You don't have to do anything. You can, and there is a kind of automated level of threat perception that it does. And it just compiles this. And it just compiles this and it further feeds this into different applications and different kinds of information bureaus, wherever this information might be necessary to take action on. So whether it's actually actionable information or not, this becomes a valuable, like, because it becomes a data set that exists, and the data set, it presupposes its own legitimacy in a sense. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Oh no, can you move on next, please? We'll come back to this later. And apart from this, there are, of course, like whatever was traditional patrolling also has been there's an attempt to datify even that. Like when I was talking about patrols, now you have applications that track how where cars are going to patrol, whether, and it's funny because the apps can also track whether the car is off but the AC is on, because you're also trying to police the police and to ensure that there is a certain kind of efficiency that you're creating a narrative of. When you're saying patrolling needs to happen in a particular way. But what it's also doing is creating information that is giving you some kind of idea that, oh, you've patrolled there and this is where a distress call has come from earlier. It means that area itself is something that needs more attention. So the more attention you pay to it, that area becomes geolocated in a sense and becomes flagged as either a criminal hotspot, it becomes flagged as either one that requires specific kinds of access of resources that, like, policing resources that need to be deployed more in the area. And I think, we think of this as being a very predictive kind of process. But I will, while I pass on to Anvesh, I will say that when you look at how this data is made, what exactly of this data is being carried through these systems and how it gains legitimacy, there is something that has to give us a lot of pause for not just interoperability, but the existence of these databases themselves. Yeah, can you move on next, please? Yeah.
So as Mrinalini spoke about the contemporary policing and surveillance that's there, so we So we thought of like how the question is like how these databases are made, or how historically these databases came into existence. So we had to do archival research to understand how the policing actually, police as an institution was formed in the during the colonial times, and what were the circumstances that the Nizam was supposed to enact certain legislations and certain police practices. So to do that, we have gone through archives, and then we realized. It's that the Criminal Tribes Act becomes one of the major enactment historically that has provided or facilitated for such surveillance and systemic targeting of communities. Oh, okay, sorry. The systemic targeting of communities that were considered that were nomadic and semi-nomadic in nature. That the reason for this is the British were in British from 1800, they were into the commercial trade, and they were heavily dependent on the agriculture economy, and they saw these communities who were itinerant, who were like nomadic or semi-nomadic in nature, to be someone controlled. So through 1800s only they started this department called Thuggy and Dacoity Department to control the people who they thought were committing highway robberies, and they considered them as class. And as the caste uh, seems to be the genesis of Indian social organization as understood by the British. They considered the criminal classes who were committing highway robbery as a hereditary thing, and that's just not hereditary, but it's something that because of the caste system they cannot come out of it, because there is no mobility as such in the caste. So so through the Thuggy and Dacoity department, they wanted to control and monitor these communities. So so by so it is interesting to know that this Thuggy and Dacoity department is considered the foundation for modern day intelligence. Why is the question? Because this was the first time when British was trying to like understand, control, and predict the behavior of certain communities. And through prediction, they want to be efficiently control uh, they want to control this behavior and to restrain their movement so that they are not traveling across. So this is how their whole this criminalization of certain communities has started in early 18th century. So yeah, why intelligence? So how that intelligence that is created and why it is important today? Because the predictability needs some data, and the data needs to be collected, and how the data is collected and how the databases are created historically under Criminal Tribes Act, and also other ancillary and legislation that allowed for certain data collection, dataification, and the surveillance and all. So if we are going to the historically how the developments of these enactments have come. So first was the formation of Thuggy and Dacoity department, and here there is a government superintendent Sleeman, H.W. Sleeman, who headed the Thuggy and Dacoity department, and his notions of criminality were very much orientalist, and he attributed a lot of anthropometric and caste-based attributes to the communities, and asserted that these because these communities have the social, economical, and anthropomorphic attributes, they are systemically uh, uh, addicted to commission of offenses, especially the cognizable offenses. And then the bureaucracy came up with a circular 18 called the circular 18 of the judicial commissioner in 1856. This is the first legal instrument in the North India that came with the regulations of criminalizing communities. And also when you are criminalizing the community, you are also providing for certain surveillance mechanisms. The surveillance mechanisms included registration of the members of the communities who they considered are criminal. And by the way, we know who these people were considering criminal as criminal communities, the communities that were not in the uh, agriculture economy, those who are out of the agriculture economy. And yeah, and also the caste order, the positionality of their caste, who were not falling under mostly under this chaturvarna system, like the hierarchical caste system that we have, where Brahmins are at the top, and then followed by Kshatriyas, then Vaishyas and Sudras, and there are other communities who fall outside of it too, who were considered untouchables. and then the communities who are considered Adivasis, who are in the forest dwelling communities, and indigenous communities, and communities that were like in the itinerary trade who were outside the system. These communities were the communities especially targeted because they were not in the economic agriculture economy, and they were considered they were migrating from place to place for the trade, itinerant trade. They were earlier, before the British had this railways, and there was no transportation. These people were the people who were transporting the goods, the necessary goods, to either army from one place to another. So that's why they were nomadic. Few communities were nomadic in that nature, and few communities were nomadic because of the shifting agriculture practices that they have and all. And these communities were seen as a threat because they were not able to locate them. They were not able to police them through locating them to a certain geopolitical area. So and again, the notions of purity, pollution also place, and these communities were considered polluted or outside of the Varna system. These communities were the primary target of the British colonial administration, and which was informed by the Brahminical notions of Indian society. So, so the Circular 18 of the Judicial Commission was the first circular which tried to criminalize these communities, and then and also provided for a system of surveillance. This surveillance included registration of the members of the community, and after the registration, they were given the pass system. They were given some pass. Like if you're living in a village, and if you want to leave the village, you have to take a pass for even for a night, or somewhere, even if you're visiting a next village or some district or to your relative's place. So this was a pass system. That means your movement was completely restrained. You were uh, and then yeah, this was mostly applicable to the North India, but the colonial judiciary itself, few of the courts have struck down the circular, say, for the want of legislative competence. I mean, we have to understand this is a legal this thing, that this was a circular passed by the bureaucracy and not the parliament in Westminster. So this was struck down. And also, then there were the court was citing, we have CRPC and IPC, which also have similar provisions that gone for the that try to go on people who are addicted to crime. I mean, quote unquote, addicted to crime. So the court then struck down on the basis of this. But this Sleeman and other bureaucrats were influential in convincing the British Parliament to pass an enactment. Now they wanted an enactment because they know the bureaucratic administrative orders would not have the same force of law that the legislation will have. So then they came with this Criminal Tribes Act in 1871. So this again, the Criminal Tribes Act incorporated all the surveillance mechanisms, the registration that the article that the circular 18 provided. And this got the Criminal Tribes Act then was amended in 1911. And I mean, this and all will go into detail with the when I'll be speaking about the resettlement process and all. So the Criminal Tribes Act basically again introduced the same restrictions, criminalization uh, of the communities that they considered criminal. Then yeah, yeah, that this happened in the 1911. So earlier they started with the wandering communities and all, and with 1911 they expanded the scope of criminal tribes to include communities which are not wandering, also other communities. And we have a very big list of communities that were criminalized in the inquiry report of 19. I mean, I'm going there only. There's the then in 1948 the CTA uh, was repealed, and there was a commission. There was a committee, the inquiry committee headed by Justice Iyengar. It recommended the repeal and denotification of criminals, and the denotification happened in 1952. So then, after the okay, this is the story of post historically how the this legislations and enactment came. And after that, what happened? So in 1962, again the Andhra Pradesh, because erstwhile Telangana was the part of Andhra Pradesh because of the linguistic reorganization and all that happened. So Andhra Pradesh government comes with a, I mean, Andhra Pradesh comes with a legislature called Habitual Offenders Act, which tries to again control the habitual criminals. So on the face of it, it does not talk caste or the association as criminality, but in practice, it actually incorporated, or it actually did what the CTA was doing earlier. Yeah. Yeah. No, the record. That so also the records that were used again were reinforced through the police manuals, as Mrinalini was talking. Also, the registers that they were used, the suspect registers or depredated registers or history sheets and all, they were again continued and incorporated through the Andhra Pradesh police manuals. Then we have the Telangana formation in 2014, and the new government came, and there's the new era of police. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you now this. So how this? So this under the CTA, police wanted information, data to control and to criminalize. So this data was collected through a lot of registers, and the interesting thing is, though the uh, local government was responsible for registering communities, and the district collector was responsible for maintaining the records, the village officials were responsible for actually implementing it, like the pass system and all, or tracking down the communities, and all were done by the village headman. Village headman, as Murali was again mentioning, are the people who belong to this dominant caste identities, and these people were actually at times using these communities to actually commit. They're forcing these communities to commit crimes or dacoities, because these communities are already considered criminal. So they were forcing them to commit crimes and also taking the share from that. So, and this thing was happening, and this was happening in the context of colonial and caste nexus, and how they were seeing the caste and they're seeing the criminality. So, and again, so here interestingly, the police, the village headman also had the village crime notebooks, and this is where all the records were being, uh, all the movement records of the movements, the personal information of the family, all these things that we are now talking are have come through these things of CTA. What CTA and the other rules, and the other rules that CTA mentioned, CTA warranted, gave an extensive list of uh, information that's collected extensive, and through this information they were again criminalizing. So the information was collected for criminalization, for surveillance, and to strengthen and reinforce their notions of caste based criminality. So this here police as an institution was working as a institution of knowledge production, and also the institution of surveillance. So this is how the databases historically have come into existence. So that is the same databases that continued post-colonial India, and now with the new 2014, with the digitization or digital or tech-based. So the predictability is of predicting or asserting or attributing certain criminality to certain geographies, and certain and geographies in the Indian context. Who the cities, the villages are based on the caste identities, on the based on the caste positionalities, the organization, social organization of the city. So as a crime spots we are talking about. So the crime spots is basically, if some information goes from a community, and the community is considered criminal, and so this is how, if there are certain people who are living there, and then that is considered as a crime spot. And that's how policing is. There's need to be more policing. There needs to be more policing of these people. And how it actually in the criminal CTA regime took place is that we have understood through going through the archives. Oh, can you go to the archives, this thing? Yeah. Okay. Kind of sources we relied on to understand this process is the police administration reports. These are the reports, annual reports that police was reporting to the higher authorities to about the crime and the statistics, and the police manuals and judiciary and jail records of Nizam state, fortnightly police reports, home department reports, and publication of police, prison, and judiciary, archival reports of case transcripts, relevant notification, other official communication with Nizam state in Urdu, uh, home department reports about crime in Hyderabad, various records that colonial administration kept, and also the extradition records and other relevant legislation that were available. So these are the things that we went and we went to looked into to understand the process of dataification, or the how the knowledge was created during the time of uh, during historically, and what are its impact on the contemporary times. So the especially with the police admin records, I mean, all this talk a lot of about the data, how what the data took and how, but police admin records give a uh, very detailed understanding of how the caste is understood by the police. So so if you see that the police admin reports are the annual reports where the crime that is happening in the whole of Nizam state is being reported, and these reports are categorized. These reports are categorized into six classes. Basically, first is like offenses against in persons. Then the second is serious offenses against persons. Third, and here third is the offenses against property. This and the minor, and the fifth is the minor offenses against property. These two categories are the categories where the police admin reports are very detailed, and the question is why, because all the other crimes are considered a crime that is committed by an individual, but here when the offenses against property are concerned, these offenses are like dacoity, house robbery, house breaking, and theft. These are the offenses that are considered to have a community, a gang that commits these offenses. So these gangs, as per the understanding of police and the colonial bureaucracy, are the gangs who are nomadic, or who are marginalized, who are not into the agriculture, this thing. And these reportings are very clear. All in the class 3 and class 4 offenses, in most of the other sections, you do not see the caste as a indicator, or the mere mentioning of what caste they belong and why the commission. But here, interestingly, in the class 3 and class 4, you see gangs of Irkalas here, or gangs of Lambadas. These Lambada and Irkala are the communities that were notified under the CT of Nizam state. So here they have a detailed narration of how these gangs are working, where are these gangs going, who are the members of these gangs, where are they residing, and all. Yeah. So these things, so through this, police was narrating what they are doing, and they are reinforcing that yeah, we are doing this because these people are already committing these offenses. So that's why the collection of data is important, because these people are committing offenses, so we are collecting data so that we can predict them. So this is the caste biased datafication that the police of Hyderabad has done, and that still continues today, because all these are incorporated through Habitual Offenders Act, and again we have this police regulations and manuals that. So what happened is, after they have collected so much data and criminalized certain communities, they came up with this concept of resettlement through 1911 amendment to the CTA. Resettlement is like forcefully relocating these communities to places that government have designated. So the two places here are Lingal and Manor. These settlements, Mannanor, yeah, Mannanor and Lingal. These are the two settlements where the people who are criminalized, and the members of the criminal communities that were criminalized under the CTA of Telangana, I mean Hyderabad Nizam state, were relocated. So this happened, and here it is like prison-like system where they are not allowed to go out. And the more and more information about them, how they behave, what are their, how to resettle them, and these are, so this information that they collected has led to the resettlement process. And through the resettlement process, where they were there, the more information is collected of where they are going, and how they can how they can be subjected to surveillance even when they leave the settlements. So when they were in the settlements, that they came the remission for good behavior policy, they were remitted, but because of the data they have collected, they were able to subject them to surveillance. So this is how the system, they're producing knowledge. They were being becoming more sophisticated in surveillance. Earlier they tried to criminalize, then they tried to resettle, and now they do not need the space to do the surveillance. They now can do the surveillance because they have the data of these people. And these people are not criminals. These people are criminalized by the colonial and orientalist understanding of caste and criminality. Yeah. 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 So this is how the data was created, and that these are the same databases that are still being used. This is the reason we wanted to go into the historically what happened and how these databases came into force, and how the CTA Criminal Tribes Act becomes necessary to understand how and why these databases were created. What was the foundational principles behind creating these databases and producing this knowledge. Yeah. So Mrinalini would take up now and talk about the contemporary mode.
Yeah. So one thing I think while we were speaking, I want to say there have been scholars who have looked at crime incidences and have seen that whatever was called as gang behavior, gang criminality, that this was a particular kind of crime that needed a lot of attention of the British, all of that, it has all been debunked. It has all been debunked as being based on nothing except like this, for what was a threat to their commercial interest at a particular kind of time, who they were seeing were like mobilizing on the basis of it. But the point is, even as all of that has been debunked by many scholars, the data that has been created within these systems still continues to these days. All of that data of one who were in settlements, like it has been great practice, not only for how sophisticated statistic analysis on the basis of this has become, which is also what the British have left with us, but largely that one, the pattern of surveillance, one that you are collecting data and you're collecting a large amount of data, not only about family but about photo, about this thing. Even though today we know that it's extremely racist to say that, oh, criminals look like this, but that data is still there. Second, what you do with this data and who you surveil. Today you see the CTA is repealed, you can't actually do it, but you have habitual offender provisions, which means the surveillance of people, you might no longer have passes or like this thing. But today with the clients we work with, can you imagine, there are still, if there's a wedding happening in that particular community, they need to take police permission, because the assumption is that, oh, if a community of people are gathering in one place, it means they're going to commit a crime. So in effect, they're still having to do this. This is not in your database. This is not actually within any of your technological apparatus or anything at all. But it's the tech which enables all of this kind of other discretionary power of the police. And lastly, what we see as being very localized police information of who is coming, who is going. Now, you just move on to the last, with like interoperable like systems which are not just within the state. Not, this is not a Telangana or a Hyderabad problem or a history of that. It's just where data was easily available, so this research was here. But now that we have all of these across India, and not only within the policing system but also within like different parts of the justice system, today a forensic expert or even a judge can actually search who the witnesses in a crime are. Leave criminals, you can even search who the witnesses are. I think we really, and to the extent that today we think association of crime itself breeds suspicion, to the extent that even witnesses are like considered as people that you need to keep track of, right? So I think that we've tried to set apart this idea of what exactly is the tech doing, but saying that as long as that tech exists or like databases exist, you will also need data to put into it. So that's where we've been coming from and we've been worried about. Sorry, we've been speaking for a very long time, but we'll take questions now.
Yeah.
In 2018 and 19, the New Orleans, this is in the United States, the New Orleans Police Department sort of collaborated with Palantir, which is a defense company, to sort of do predictive policing through social media, wherein they, you know what I'm talking about, they looked at social media and tried to understand and situate the relatives of potential aggressors and victims. Now, when we look at India, and especially from your very, I mean, it's an excellent research that you, I'm very happy to see this, because there is a legacy of documents that you're talking about. That is that we know that these communities and these relations exist within, let's say, criminal communities. Not to agree to that term, but just to simplify. So, how do you sort of compare and contrast the social media-based sort of web scraping filtering of the United States versus this legacy of, this community has consistently been doing this, and these sort of relations are being formed? That is, just to put it simply, how are sort of siblings of aggressors or victims seen through the datafied police network in India as compared to the US? And also one second question, just very short. What do you think are the geographical implications in terms of where people are living out of these datafied locale-based policing? What are the geographical implications of that, do you think? In terms of, is there a discrimination of areas within India as well? That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
The compared to last year, the crime reduction rate. So what I want to, it's more than a question, I just want to reflect actually. Since we are thinking, we are hotspotting these crimes, hotspot area, don't you feel that we are living in an era that for mainly biased, and at the same time generalizing, stigmatizing these things? At the same time, how, of course, if you are locating a crime hotspot in specific community areas, there will be a bias will happen against because of some piece of data. So how we can tackle this actually? In a community, of course, just like you mentioned earlier, everybody is not going to be the crime person actually. So of course there will be a bias if we release these kind of data, very, because which is very sensitive. So how we can tackle these issues in terms of technology or maybe some social understanding? So I just want to reflect on that, how we can tackle at the same time. Yeah, it's helping actually, it's reducing the crime, but at the same time it is creating a big bias. So since today is the remembering day of Birsa Munda actually, so one of the we all know that, and since still we are following the, you know, tribes, criminal tribes act and all that, and there's a stigmatizing still going on tribes, oh, that kind of things. So I just want to reflect. That's it. Thank you.
Caste within Muslim communities. There are nomadic tribes also which are within Muslim communities that are facing the brunt of surveillance a lot more. So that piece is up. I will. Sorry, I don't know how to share it. Should we? I can give you the title of the piece and you can look at it. But so it's not. No, I will change the title. But it's so there are no numbers as such that, so I can't give you a quantitative idea of that this much, there's this much, but there's definitely an assumption that given what our socio-political regime is, and especially in Hyderabad, the kind of population composition there is of course a disproportionate impact that we see, particularly within marginalized class within Muslim families and people again who are coming with different kinds of hereditary occupations, but they've also not been able to shed in different ways. So they are of course witnessing policing. I mean, I'll take this in the with his question about bias and policing. What is the difference we see and what can we do with that data? I will take it further, but.
First slide, you mentioned neoliberal Silicon Valley. Coming from Hyderabad, I could see a lot of changes of whatever has happened after 2014, and especially with the past government, we saw how that was. But more than that, I mean, if you're talking in terms of how crime itself evolves, it's most likely linked with the state interest of that time. And we see that the new state's formation is one of the key movements that switched into the new era. But what exactly is this kind of link that there is between neoliberalism and the obsession with tracking crime? And also, when we say crime, it's not all kinds of crime. It's the regular criminal law, that's all. So can you tell us a bit more about this link, neoliberalism and the obsession with tracking crime?
These communities where they live, and these are ghettoized, and these places are considered crime spots. So in the Indian context, it becomes the question of caste, and the communities which are historically considered criminal or historically marginalized by the caste. So yeah, when the police takes information under the habitual offenders act, they take the information about the family And also when they are recording this history sheets and all, they take the information of family and their occupation, and as Mrinalini was mentioning about the family trees and all. So yeah, there's definitely surveillance on other siblings or the other family members, even the minors at times, what they where they're going, what are they doing in their life. So this surveillance is there. So with regards to the space again, so Radha Kumar is a person who has written in the colonial casting of policing. So how the police, how certain spaces were more policed and how certain spaces were less policed, and who was the police policing for, the interests of the economy and all. Again, with regards to the neoliberal economy and the policing, that becomes a question again, why the policing is coming into the base. So now with the neoliberal economy coming, with the IT boom that we have in Hyderabad, MNCs are coming up, and there needs to be space that is considered safe. So to create the safe space, you need to control certain behaviors. I mean, certain behaviors that state feels are not in line with the neoliberal market and the state agendas. So that's how again this whole system of neoliberal economy has the connection. The political economy of the state has connection towards the crime and criminalization. So that's changing, that's reinforcing, but the contradictions are still the same.
Okay, on the geographical limits, I want to just add, um, actually, both even on the siblings bit, not only is that there is a mapping of in the family tree that is happening proactively, we are also seeing it play out in terms of consequences, because we have represented children who are like, the courts decide their best interest is to basically put them in a state institution rather than sending them home, because that you have someone in your family where like this person is this thing. So the idea of separation is also being acted on, that it's not just aggressiveness or possible criminality which is carrying out, it's also being acted on in these ways to separate families in real terms, even though it may not be like in their best interest or whatever which the law tells us to do, but the best interest means separation basically. So to counter that logic is of course very difficult. On the geography, yeah, but that is, yeah. So I mean, and that any kind of association, that's what Anvesh was telling me, that that if there is a pattern of association that's seen enough and collected upon enough, there might, and if there's even one case that's put, whether you're acquitted, whether you're convicted, whatever it is, a history sheet will be opened, and you're like engendering surveillance, all of this. With the coming of tech, there are none of these kind of safeguards anymore. So even though right now the Supreme Court has recently said that, oh, all history sheets must be reviewed and audited and this thing, all of that, technology presents a very like huge barrier to that kind of check and balance that you can create, because you're just automating information for all purposes, whether or not it's relevant, whether or not it actually means anything. And like that kind of social media tracking is also happening here. Just saying. So on the geographical impact, I see that, I think it's very clear that Anvesh has touched upon this, that our our spaces are very caste segregated also. They are. And particularly for marginalized, working class, oppressed caste people who are living in slums, who are living in urban slums, I just want to say that, you know, they are actually the ones who witness policing as an intimate part of their everyday lives, because the only representative of the state you see is the police, which is very different for all of us, because we navigate like the world in very different ways. So the police actually becomes your karta dharta kind of for all problems. So even when it might be a domestic dispute where all you might want is to actually just have someone listen to you, or like you might want someone to counsel you. Sometimes you might just want to say that, you've been looking for work and you've not found anything. You might even go to the, and we have clients who do all of this, except all of this basically gets tagged as a distress call or gets coded as data in the system. So it obviously generates that from a particular area there is more need that you need to pay attention to. So policing has functioned in two ways then. One, where are more instances popping up, and second, what area needs to be protected more. which is basically the resourced, propertied, where a particular kind of like a 3-star police official will be deployed there rather than like a low, like rather than just your normal constable or your head constable, things like that. So coming to that, with the, so what we see as an SEC zone, like in this area, and when you look at what the Cyberabad police station and their functioning is like, very much like it was earlier, particularly in the narrative. I'm only speaking from what the narrative has seemed to be. It has seemed to be that to attract foreign investment, you need to make this look like it's a very civilized place to live. And where, of course, ease of doing business and all are like terms that the government will bandy about and all. But the fact that, you know, there have been two things that you've needed to do. One is for like places like IKEA, you had to give very huge tax breaks so that people are not having to pay anything to attract this kind of thing. The second thing is the investment of the image of like the narrative that, one, there is a property public here that has the kind of purchasing power to do this, and second, that it's a safe enough place not only for like women who will need to commute from like these corporate areas or not, but also that there is a significant investment in the kind of law and order systems that are needed to protect this kind of property like interest when you're quoting like especially FDI, right, foreign directed investments. And there is a lot of this that has happened in Telangana in the last decade, maybe. I've not tracked it too closely, but so I can see that there are links. I don't know how one particularly traverses to the other and creates other. I'm just saying this is information that's clearly being acted upon. So it's that. Do you want to add anything?
No, I just wanted to say about like, uh, so we were recently dealing with a case of a person who's just become a major, and that person's mother, this person belongs to a community that's a denotified community in Bhopal. That the person's mother was made uh, m- was made the perpetrator of a crime, a theft. So then the court acquitted, and then the police comes and arrests this minor child of hers, and says this person was the actual offender. And then they have created such stories, like 2 3 stories on him, which have the similar narration. If you go and see the charge sheet, there would be the similar narration all together, some like template. And then after, like, then the person becomes major, and there is another case that's been slapped on him, and now a history sheet has uh, been created on him. So this is how. So you need not be criminal, you have a history, and you belong to certain community, and certain narrations are made against you. Then the data that they have, they'll use this to make certain templates, and this is how the data is used to reinforce and criminalize or more marginalize these people. Is Yeah, I think, yeah. Thank.
Doing a good Samaritan, which one? Yeah, which is basically what started funding these settlements in India uh, at some point in the past. And the narrative is fully of reformative. It is of reformation. The state, like, there is a huge investment in saying reformation, reformation, to the extent that even today, while not calling it settlements, you are still like, we are still seeing children being put into certain kinds of educational programs that are uh, that are in the face of it convincing them to leave behind a life of crime, all of that. But I mean, at this point, even our sociological theories are looking at that crime happens in deprivation, things like that. The danger, I think, really is again the casted imagination that you need to change someone's culture and like the belief systems to ensure that this doesn't happen. Which, that logic is really problematic in saying that. So I don't think the problem is at all in saying that give better life opportunities to people. Ensure that there is all of this, because we are seeing that like there's obviously a full specter of criminality that's created where kids are not able to go to school, they don't get to stay within like their schooling systems, you can't find employment. All of these barriers of access still are there, especially also because we don't, in India, we don't really recognize the history of denotified tribes as coming with a specific legacy in itself. So people are like distributed administratively everywhere. They're in general also, they're in OBC also, they're in SC also, they're in ST also. So it's a very haphazard kind of mix where suddenly certain like you'll have NGOs, you'll have some welfare schemes also, you'll have, there is all of this. But I think what that reformation is trying to do is a question we must still come to. That's all. I hope it answers your question.